I think because the gospel's just so portable, it's one of those things. The gospel, it's simple enough to explain to a child. It's rich enough and deep enough to keep exploring forever because it's really the great truth, central truths of the Bible. And so, Two Ways to Live, as it's kind of evolved and been used over the years, just has ended up being used in multiple ways.
That was Tony Payne, one of the people behind one of the oldest and yet most effective Australian tools for explaining the gospel, Two Ways to Live. I'm Pete Hughes, and you've clicked on the Reach Australia podcast. And in this season, we are looking at different evangelistic tools to fill your missional toolbox with as many resources as possible. I sat down with Tony to talk about the history, but also the future of Two Ways to Live. It's still a tool that has a lot of potential and should be considered part of your toolbox. We pick up the conversation where I've asked Tony to explain what Two Ways to Live is.
Nearly everyone's encountered Two Ways to Live in some form or other, say as a training course you did at church or as a tract that you've been given or you hand out and so on. Underlying it all, what Two Ways to Live really is an outline of the New Testament gospel. It has 6 parts, 6 boxes, 6 points, and within those points there are 1 or 2 or 3 bullet points that explain the content of each of those 6 boxes or points, and that's what Two Ways to Live is. It's an attempt to summarize in a sort of skeleton form what the New Testament gospel is in a way that Christians can memorize and use and can be used in a variety and multiple different ways. So I guess it's a simple theological framework of the gospel.
If you were going to present Two Ways to Live, how, like in terms of time, again, for those who've never seen it before, how long do you think it takes to present? If you're going to do it properly, doing all the verses, making sure you've got all the things right. Well, is it 3 minutes or how long do you reckon?
There or thereabouts. But that's the thing, Pete. See, if I was going to just read you out the bullet points, I could read them out to you probably in 2.5 minutes if I spoke quickly at the most. Okay. But you would never, ever do that unless I was just trying to tell you what the bullet points are. If you were explaining the gospel to someone, how long it took you to present or explain that would depend on you. Depend on, are you the kind of person who likes to kind of talk around things and illustrate and kind of go off on tangents? Is the other person asking you questions? And so it's an outline that you use in multiple ways, and especially that you use contextually depending on who you are, who the person is. But in its brief sense, if you sat down with the back of an envelope and said, how would I explain the gospel to you? I've got 6 kind of points I'd like to get to, and I'll see if I can tell you what they are. And the first one's creation, and off you went. Mostly, you could do it in a few minutes.
Okay. Now, give me a bit of the history of Two Ways to Live, because this has been around for a while. It's a little scary how long, as I go back, I go, I remember vaguely it coming out. What was the thinking behind it? Because there were other presentations of the gospel that were around at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, it was an era back in the mid to late 70s when the tract, 4 Spiritual Laws was a famous one. The Bridge to Life was another one, where there was various ways that you could summarize or quickly explain the gospel to somebody. And the need arose, I think, to say, how could we sort of go back to square one and think, if we were going to do that clearly and as best as we could, what would be the absolutely key things you'd want to include? And originally that was done really not by asking what would connect best with Australians in the late 1970s, early 1980s or anything like that. It was more, what does the New Testament say? When you look at the gospel speeches in Acts, or you look at all the little gospel summaries in the epistles, and you draw all that together and what are the absolutely core elements of the gospel proclamation, it kind of comes down to 2 things. It comes down to the death of Jesus in atonement for sin and his resurrection as the Lord and ruler and Christ of the world, who offers forgiveness now to people and who is now the judge of the world and will return in judgment. And those 2 huge points are just constantly what dominate New Testament presentations of the gospel. And then once you have those 2 points in place, you say, well, there's always also a call for response. What are you going to do with this? And the response is repent and put your trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so what I've really just described to you are points 4, 5, and 6 of Two Ways to Live. And it came from perceiving that that's really what happens when the apostles preach the gospel over and over and again. Those are the things that they constantly come back to that seem to be the absolutely non-negotiable core elements. And once you put those in place, you say, well, in order to really understand those three key gospel kind of points, you need to just sketch in a bit of background. If Jesus dying for our sin, to take the punishment for our sins, to take that judgment upon himself, if that's key to understand, you've got to understand, well, why are we facing death? Why is a death required in order for somebody to stand in for our sins? And so you've got to explain God's judgment against our sin, and that's box 3, the previous one. And then if you're going to say, well, what's sin? Why are we being judged for? What is this sin that we're being judged for? Well, that becomes box 2 that talks about our rebellion against God. And then you think, well, who's this God we're rebelling against, and why is that so bad? You've got to go back to box 1, which is God's the creator and ruler of everything. And so for us to rebel against him is a travesty of what we were created to be. So the first 3 points then come in to kind of provide, in a sense, the background, so the 3 gospel points at the end really make sense.
So what you're really saying is the way that you've designed this is not so much as a reaction to other presentations, but more as here is how the New Testament unfolds, or here's the New Testament gospel.
That was our attempt. And it's always, every human summary is never completely perfect, and you can always improve it. But in essence, yes, we're trying to say if you wanted to isolate the real nutshell of what you'd want to teach every Christian to know and to be able to explain to a non-Christian as the gospel, what is it in the New Testament? And this is what we came up with. And initially you asked where it came from. It came from a desire to use that sort of framework for 2 main purposes. One was to catechize Christians, to teach Christians what is the gospel that you've put your trust in, to get that clear in their heads. It's kind of like a theological framework. And secondly, of course, to equip Christians to share that gospel with their friends.
Again, I think that's been one of the big strengths of 2 Ways to Live is Dave Jensen talks about this quite regularly, that there's a converting Christians, well, people to Christianity, following Jesus, but there's also, as you're following Jesus, to help others know who Jesus is. And so there's a second conversion. And the course the course does that. And it, as you say, it catechizes Christians into here is the gospel, here is how to present it. Sorry,
I was going to say that's what the 2 Ways to Live training course always did. It did those 2 things. Yeah. Over time, we realised it's really hard to do those 2 things in one course and do them well. And then, so in the late 90s, early 2000s, we split it into 2 courses, we explicitly put those 2 things as being 2 parts of the one thing, to know and to share the gospel. And more recently, as we've revised and improved the whole thing and rewritten it, we've actually split those off into 2 components to sort of learn the gospel, be catechized in it, sort of part 1. Part 2, okay, how do I share that in conversation and part of life? That's share the gospel. So we've now split the course, as people would have known it, into 2 things: learn the gospel and share the gospel. But you might want to ask me about that.
I was going to come back to how have you kind of improved it, revamped it, I don't know, renovated it. We'll see. But here's the thing: it's our presentation, but it's been transferable. So it's in different languages. There's a book. I think you've recently brought out a book. I think I saw a tote bag on the
there's a T-shirt.
On the Matthias Media. Yeah, the T-shirt. There's a kids presentation, which I think is brilliant. Like it's good. Why do you think it's been such a portable presentation in that way?
I think because the gospel's just so portable. It's one of those things, the gospel, it's simple enough to explain to a child. It's rich enough and deep enough to keep exploring forever, because it's really the great central truths of the Bible. And so 2 Ways to Live, as it's kind of evolved and been used over the years, just has ended up being used in multiple ways. So it got turned into a tract. See, it originally was designed not as a tract to hand out, as a giveaway booklet, but people started to give the little set of bullet points. There was a little booklet you used to be able to get that had the bullet points in it to help you learn the bullet points. And people started giving that away, and it wasn't designed for that at all. It was kind of a memory device.
So what was it originally? Was it just let me show you how to do the pictures and On the back of an envelope. Is that the original design?
Originally, it was just a little tiny blue booklet that the Anglican Information Office, as it was called then, way back in the early 80s, published.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
With little drawings to help you remember it and 2 or 3 little statements on each page. And it was designed so that Christians could have this and learn it and get familiar with it. But then when they talk to their friends, you just talk to your friends. But people started using that booklet and giving it away as a kind of a tract, and it wasn't designed to do that at all. And so one of the very first things we developed when Matthias Media was kind of getting up and going in the late 80s, early 90s was, well, let's make it a tract. Let's turn those 3 little bullet point statements on each page into a kind of a narrative, a text that actually explains it, that you could actually give someone that looks nice and that works as a tract. So it became a tract, a giveaway thing, and there's been literally millions of those given away in the 30 years since. Like, it's extraordinary how many of those booklets keep on being given away. So it became that. It became a giveaway booklet. It became a kids booklet. And interestingly, just on the weekend, I was chatting to someone who runs an Easy English kind of congregation down in Wollongong, who was telling me that they use the kids version, the Who Will Be King presentation, as an Easy English version, and it's incredibly powerful with the people that they're sharing it with. So,
oh, wow.
There's all kinds of different versions. There's an online version. You can go to twowaystolive.com and you can see an online presentation of it. One of the interesting variations, do you remember the Essential Jesus, that gospel that was handed out in vast quantities in the 2009s kind of time?
Yep.
The churches have got boxes of still in the back of their church somewhere, that one. That was framed by Two Ways to Live. So really, the introduction gives you the first 3 boxes of Two Ways to Live. It's kind of like the story so far. And then you read Luke's gospel. And then at the end, there's the final 3 boxes as a kind of summary of what you've just read. That Jesus died, why he rose, what that means for you, what the response is. And so that Essential Jesus giveaway was really kind of Two Ways to Live with the gospel, with the narrative of the gospel all woven through it. So there's all sorts of different ways it's been kind of used because it's just the gospel. Yeah.
And it's I think the genius of it is it's just such a simple presentation that it does have that flexibility that's there. But why do you think it's been an effective presentation of the gospel? Because there have been numerous. Do you have any clue as to how many people have responded to the gospel through this presentation?
None whatsoever, Pete.
No. but I do know of many testimonies where people have done this, but yeah.
I'd say who knows how many thousands it would be. I mean, given how, even just given literally the millions of copies of the tract that have been given away, and tens of thousands of Christians around the world who've been trained to use it, and pastors who've used it as the basis of evangelistic sermons. A lot of people preach using a Two Ways to Live framework to preach the gospel. I mean, who knows? One day in glory, perhaps we will.
We'll may find out then. But why do you think it's been effective as a presentation of the gospel?
Well, I suppose I could give the pious answer because the gospel's effective and it captures the power of the gospel, okay? But I think it's because it grasps the two kind of key sides of the gospel and explains them clearly. So you'd say the two key components of the gospel, in a sense, are to do with the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus. And with the death of Jesus, because it explains why a death is necessary, that we're under the judgment of God because of sin, and that judgment is death. So in other words, if we're not going to suffer death, someone else has got to suffer death on our behalf. It makes that really clear. In other words, by having the bad news of judgment as the kind of prologue in those first 3 boxes, God's the creator, you've rebelled against him, box 2, you're under his judgment, box 3, kind of, oh yeah, I get now why Jesus came to die. And so I think it makes that logic becomes very clear for people. And then secondly, as he rises from the dead, many, many contemporary gospels just kind of treat the resurrection a bit like a footnote, sort of it's all about the death of Jesus for sins and, oh yes, he rose from the dead, which is a nice kind of capstone on the whole narrative. But in the New Testament, if you look at how they preach the gospel, very often it's kind of almost the other way around, that they proclaim the resurrection of Jesus, who was crucified, so that as a living Lord, he offers you forgiveness on the basis of his death and eternal life. And as a living Lord is the ruler of your life, and as a living Lord will come to judge. It gives an appropriate emphasis to that kind of the other shoe that falls for the gospel, that the other part of it, which is just so crucial because, crucial is a bit of a pun, but is so important that the resurrection becomes as central as the death of Jesus, because you don't really understand the New Testament gospel until you understand both of those things. So I think that's one reason it's been effective. It's because unlike any other kind of outline gospel that I've seen like this, it gives due weight to both of those things and to the response then that comes from that of repentance and faith.
Let's come back to, as you mentioned, you've recently kind of thought through how to train people, I guess, in presenting Two Ways to Live. Talk through us some of those changes that have taken place.
Sure, Pete. I guess I alluded to. I'll start that again.
That's okay.
Sure. Sorry,
is that the question that we? Sorry, are you happy to get? Yeah, because we kind of have done the thing.
I just was thinking, if you wanted to cut that earlier thing out because I got to it too early, I won't refer to it now in the answer I'm about to give. That's all I thought to myself. So when you're editing, if you decide, we got to that a bit early, because I'll say it again now, and you can decide whether you want.
Okay. Yeah, we'll work it out there.
Does that sound good?
Okay. Yep, sure. Let me give you the question again. Tony, let's talk a little bit about how it's not just a presentation, it's a training tool to help Christians understand the gospel, and that's gone through a change over the last little while. You've rethought through that. Talk to us about how you've thought that through, how you're helping Christians to present the gospel better, especially in the new updated version.
Sure. The new updated version, we've tidied up the wording of the presentation or the outline itself and given it a new look and feel. So the actual outline itself has had a few tweaks. But in sort of going back to square one and thinking, how could we most helpfully equip and resource churches to do this work, that is to teach their people the gospel so that they really know it and are fired up by it, and to give them a framework for sharing it with others. We just decided it was better to do that in two chunks rather than just in one training course, like the previous venerable Two Ways to Live training course did. And so we divided it into learn the gospel and share the gospel. And so they're each a kind of an 8-part program or resource you can use, say, within a small group. We've tried to make it so that I think the previous version of Two Ways to Live was quite demanding to lead, and I think that put some churches off leading it, as if you need to be a pretty experienced leader to kind of pull it off. And that was partly because there was so much crammed into it, I think. But the new version, we wanted to make it really almost self-running, so that, say, a small group, you get the book, there are free videos, and it kind of walks you through it in a fairly unthreatening and easy way to do. And our feedback so far certainly has been that both of these two components, I think, are functioning much better as two components now. One where you really dig into each box of Two Ways to Live of the gospel presentation and understand it theologically and understand how the world is different in the way it speaks to us. And it kind of equips you to really grasp it as a Christian. And many people are finding not only that it's kind of a bit of a doctrinal revolution for people to kind of really understand the gospel framework deeply themselves and see how it connects to everything. But some churches have been using it as something that they go through early on with newcomers as a kind of, here's the gospel we all believe. And we're seeing people converted through it who come to church and do this and realize, actually, I didn't understand this gospel. And then part two is, I think, allowed us to do a much better job than the earlier version of the course did, in showing how the framework, the outline, fits into an evangelistic life. That it's not just, here's a presentation, look for an opportunity to blurt it out over somebody, hopefully, but to be able to spend the time thinking about where does personal witness and being the kind of person for whom the gospel bubbles out of us because we love God and love the gospel and love other people, such that we're just ready to be Christian in our lives and for our conversation to be shaped by the gospel. So it's a training framework that helps you to, in the messiness of everyday life and conversation, have a framework for conversation. It's not even, I think, it's not even that you will always get an opportunity to say, how about I explain the gospel to you in the next 5 minutes? Often a conversation that's gospel related will just be in the messiness of an interaction. And the new kind of training material we've got helps you to see how knowing a gospel framework actually also helps you just have messy conversations as well. So I think that the new kind of 2-part training thing has been really valuable and so far seems to be really helping churches, and I think they're finding it much easier to run as well within their small groups and so on.
When you first developed Two Ways to Live, did you have a particular person in mind? Because it was kind of established at a university kind of level.
Yep.
Or a university context.
Mm-hmm.
Was it university students that you had in mind in terms of presenting the gospel to them, or was it more broader than that?
I think originally it was developed within a university ministry context that also had St. Matthias and University Church and Campus Bible Study back in the day. It was university focused, but it was also a parish with a whole bunch of people and a multi-generational community of people who were there. So it wasn't just for the students. And I think the original thought, as I was saying earlier, the original thought wasn't so much how could we craft a gospel outline for the University of 1980s Australia, but how could we teach Christians the gospel as simply as possible? And I think because there was good work done by many other people apart from me in boiling down that gospel understanding into a really simple, memorable kind of framework, I think that's why it's ended up being so incredibly widely used, why it can be used in a kid's presentation, why it's translated into languages all over the world, why Norm Gorry was using it in rural Kenya, and at the other level, at City Bible Forum, they're presenting it in the boardrooms of Australia. It's of the high flyers. It's because the gospel can be so simple and yet can be dug into deeply as well. I think it's why the original people we wrote it for, the university context, it ended up not being limited to that context. I think that's been a wonderful accident in the blessing of God that we came up with something that was so transferable, I guess.
Yeah. As a visual learner, it's incredibly helpful for me. I mean, can I remember any of the verses? Not really, but can I remember all the pictures? Absolutely, because that's just the way I think. I get the drawings, so I get it.
I haven't mentioned the drawings. Yeah, they were kind of.
Did someone design them
as a memory aid? But I think they've been very helpful for people in remembering it and in illustrating it and in giving presentations and in back of a napkin stuff. Yeah.
Do you know who wrote who did the first drawings? Was that you, or was it?
Oh no,
Philip,
definitely not me.
Someone?
No. I came into it after the initial work was done. So I don't know who came up with the first drawings. There was a team around Philip Jensen and Cole Marshall and those guys in the late 70s, early 80s who were all involved in it, and it's all a bit of a mystery.
If you're listening and you're the person who did the drawing or you know the person, email me, resources@reachaustralia.com.au. I want to talk to you. So, yeah. Okay, this has been going for a while. You've been developing this for a while. Have there been mistakes or things that you've learned as you've gone through the development, especially since you've just sort of revisited the whole course and redone the course? What are some of the things you've learned? Yeah.
Many. I'll mention a few. I think coming out of the university context where the training was first done, I think how much was crammed into the training course and how much we expected people to do in 7 or 8 weeks, I think was too demanding in those early years and those early versions of the course. And in the last 20 or 30 years have been a constant attempt to craft that training into a form that works more broadly and doesn't just require so much. So I think there were some mistakes made in the early times. Certainly, we learned that the way the training works needed to be improved, I think, and has been. I think we've certainly learned that it's like any good thing, it's able to be used and done poorly. And so to what extent is that something that I feel people who have been writing it and developing it was our fault, or was just people have used it badly? There certainly have been plenty of mistakes in how people have used it. So insofar as as the perception has been, I think there's two main perceptions I've noticed that have been, I think, not good. One is that it's a presentation that you learn by rote, and then when you get a chance, you just repeat it by rote to the person that you're wanting to speak to. That concept, which was never part of the training and spoken against in the training, still, I think, caught on in the zeitgeist that's what Two Ways to Live was. It was this rigid rote presentation that somehow you just kind of blurted over people. I think that was unfortunate.
And if you said the right magic words, then someone would become a Christian.
Exactly.
And that's not how the gospel works. No.
Yeah, it's not how conversation works either, is it? It's not how life works and relationship works. And I think the other thing, the other unintended consequence of Two Ways to Live and of the success of it as training was I think it persuaded some churches that evangelism consisted of running training courses in Two Ways to Live. So all you had to do was run your Two Ways to Live training course, and that was my effort in evangelism done. I mean, I've trained all these people, and why don't they just go off and do it? And that was certainly never what anyone who sort of knows Two Ways to Live and how it functions, and to think that that's really all that you would do in evangelism, or that you would just train people in 8 weeks and then just send them off and say, okay, you go and do evangelism. It's not an adequate overall approach to thinking about an evangelistic approach as a church. And so that, I think that's been historically been a weak point, that people have thought, if you just run people through the training course, there's your evangelism taken care of. And that's naive, really. It doesn't work that way. And Dave Jensen and many others recently have been really helpfully saying there's a whole lot of ways you can become a more evangelistically vibrant or hot congregation and then focus that energy in various helpful ways. And in some ways, Two Ways to Live can be a super helpful part of that. When I was speaking to Dave Jensen recently, especially as a way of creating that kind of heartbeat or heat, as he calls it, mission heat. If you train people in the gospel itself, in what the gospel really is, it just fires them up, not only with confidence, but with motivation and desire to get involved and to be able to have those conversations. So
we're going to be hearing from Dave in a later episode, I might ask some questions about
do that.
His thoughts on that. Okay, we've talked a lot about the presentation. We've talked a lot about how it works, but let's hear a story. Have you got a story of someone who has been changed by this? I know we've talked about there's been thousands of people whose lives have been changed through the presentation, but through the gospel. Can you give me a story that you've witnessed of someone's life being changed?
I'll give you two quick ones. There are lots, but I'll give you two quick ones that came to mind when you said that. The first is I've got a friend who's in military ministry, and talking with blokes, evangelizing guys in the military, and he's recently we've turned the Two Ways to Live presentation into a short book. I've written a short, like 80, 90-page book that just takes you through the gospel using this framework called The Christian Gospel. And he's been using that book with guys in the military. Many of them not guys who've had tertiary education. And he's found it incredibly helpful. And he sent me a delightful story of a couple of guys he'd recently finished working through that book with, and who'd been soundly converted and found it so clear and so helpful. And it's wonderful to hear that happening in different places. Like, that's far north Queensland military bases. It's fantastic. And the other story is I sometimes do seminars and stuff in churches on this material, and I gave a seminar at St Mark's, Pennant Hills, not too long ago, working through the new course, just giving some insights, working with a small group of people, running through some of the ideas. And I was really delighted. There was one lady on the table I was working at who was one of those keen Christian women who's always kind of wanted to be more open and evangelistic in her heart, but has always really struggled with it. And she found the training and the confidence she got such that she and her husband were going on a cruise the next week. And she came back to the group the following week with these wonderful stories of just having the confidence to be Christian and to talk Christianly with the other people at her table on the cruise liner, to share some of Two Ways to Live. She didn't ever sit down and share the whole thing, but because she had the framework in her head, She was able to just speak openly and talk about what she believed and make some points. And she was just excited and thrilled that this was possible for her. And to be a Christian who is open-hearted and open-lipped with the gospel just in normal life was just so exciting for her, and it's just super exciting for me to see that happening in people's lives. So there's a couple.
I love those stories there. It's always great. As you say, to hear of the gospel at work, that does create the heat. To hear the gospel itself creates the heat in itself. Okay, if people wanted to know, if someone didn't know anything about Two Ways to Live, where would you go? Where's the first place to go to find out more? Where do you see the presentation?
Well, if you go to twowaystolive.com, just all lowercase, all one word, spelled out, twowaystolive.com, that's got the full presentation there with the bullet points and with the kind of fleshed out narrative kind of presentation of it. And on that website, there's a tab up in the top corner called Church Resources. So that site is somewhere where you could send a non-Christian friend to see what the gospel is. So people use that site to evangelize their friends. But there's a little tab saying Church Resources, and if you follow through on that tab, you can see the full range of everything, the different kinds of presentations, the training material we've mentioned. And there's other things we haven't even mentioned, a set of Bible studies called You, Me, and the Bible, where you sit down and do Two Ways to Live as a kind of Bible study with people. It's all can be found there. The other thing you can do is just go to matthiasmedia.com or .com.au, and if you scroll down, there'll be a big Two Ways to Live kind of tab there that you can press on that takes you to all that stuff. So those are the two best ways to find out.
That was Tony Payne and Two Ways to Live. It's a simple and yet still an effective tool. And you can jump on the Matthias Media website and have a look at some of the different resources that they have available based on Two Ways to Live. But whatever you do, do something. I'm Pete Hughes. Chat soon.